former Obama campaign foreign policy advisor, David Tafuri. David, it's good to have you on the show. It looks bad on the outside for U.S. interest, what's going on in Yemen. What do you see as the hope?
Well, it's a very difficult situation. It's delicate, but I think the administration is approaching it correctly. The U.S. has to show its ally, Saudi Arabia, that it backs what Saudi Arabia is doing in Yemen. That's part of the reason the ships are there. It also has to show Iran that there are consequences to Iran continuing to supply the Shiite Houthi rebels. At the same time, it needs to be careful not to let the rhetoric get too out of control with Iran. We don't want to go to war with Iran over this. Also, the U.S. is trying to negotiate a nuclear agreement with Iran. The U.S. says it is compartmentalizing its diplomacy. On one hand, working towards an agreement. On the other hand, confronting Iran in Yemen. So it's going to be very interesting to see what happens.
The spin is the other way, that Iran is controlling the game. They have you at the table for nukes, and they are controlling that negotiation. And meanwhile, because your hands are tied, because you want the nuke deal so bad as the P5+1, including America, they are running roughshod. They're in Yemen right now, helping the Houthi rebels, seeming like they are for the common man, while you, with the U.S., you're for Saudi Arabia, that is not a beloved entity in that region, that is seen as funding a lot of terrorism and being a heavy. And in Iraq, equally, we now have Iran supposedly helping the little man in their fight that the U.S. is staying out of. And you say?
Well, I say there's some accuracy to that. Iran is engaging in activities around the Middle East. You've mentioned some of the countries like Iraq, like in Syria, like in Lebanon, that is destabilizing the region. But the U.S. is sending a message to Iran, especially now in Yemen. It has moved more naval ships to Yemen.
But Iran isn't stopping your
Iran,
cargo.
you cannot continue to supply the Houthi rebels with weapons.
But what are you going to do then when the Iranian ships continue on their way and you hear strong words from Iran as well, basically saying, we don't care what you say, you are now a threat to us, and to make that point clear, we're going to hold some of your people as well, and you can't make us let them go, which is what we see with the journalist and the Marine, among others.
The U.S. has to make clear there are repercussions for Iran continuing to engage in this behavior. That's what the ships are about. Certainly the U.S. has been backing Saudi Arabia in its airstrikes against Yemen. Those are against the Houthi rebels. We have to see what happens. It would be nice if the U.S. was also doing more to confront Iran and its destabilizing actions in places like Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria.
It is one thing to argue that the U.S. has the upper hand or the better hand when it comes to backing Israel over Iran in terms of their conflict because of the alliance between the U.S. and Israel. Do you think you have a solid ground with the alliance with Saudi Arabia? Or are they more of a mixed bag in terms of what they mean in the region and in the fight on terror?
Well, the relationship right now with Saudi Arabia and with some of the other Sunni Gulf countries like the UAE, like Qatar, is very sensitive. They certainly would like to see the U.S. doing more to confront Iran, and they're very worried about this nuclear agreement. But the U.S. is doing the right thing. It's in discussions with each of those countries and their leaders. It is supporting the effort in Yemen, and it needs to listen more to those countries, because we really need those countries, not just because they're allies in the region, but also because they're helping us fight ISIS and fight al-Qaeda, and we need them to continue to help us to do that.
What do you make of the criticism that these bubbling situations are a function of America pulling back, and that while pulling back sounded good to American people, it is now a price that we're paying for it?
I think there's some accuracy to that. The biggest threat to U.S. national security around the world, especially in this region, the Middle East, is there being more failed states. And we are now on the verge of having more failed states. Yemen certainly is now a failed state. Syria has been a failed state for a long time. Iraq could be a failed state. And, of course, Libya also is facing its share of problems. So the U.S. backing off in those countries is problematic, and it's going to be interesting to see what the president does in these last years of his presidency to turn that around and stop the creation of failed states.
Is this proof that our strategy to date has not been effective?
Well, I mean, it depends on what strategy you're talking about. There are aspects of our strategy that have been effective. We have started to make progress in Iraq against ISIS. We need to continue that. We have, in Libya, for instance, been very helpful in terms of revolution, helped get rid of Gaddafi, which was a good thing. But the strategy now in Libya is not helpful because Libya is in a very difficult situation. There's not enough engagement by the U.S. and by other countries. Yemen, let's wait and see. I think the U.S. is doing the right thing by not being overly engaged militarily in Yemen, but at the same time supporting our allies like Saudi Arabia as they try to push the Houthi rebels back and try and coerce the two sides into a political solution.
David Tafuri, thank you for the take. Appreciate it.
Thank you.